All right, can you see my screen, Devin? Excellent. There we go. Is it full screen now? Excellent. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate y'all joining us for this virtual meeting. I wish we were able to meet in person. I kind of miss seeing people in real life, but this will do. The purpose of today's meeting is really for me to provide an overview of the proposed updates and changes to the Welaunee Arch Master Plan that we're proposing that since the transmittal hearing that occurred on May 26th earlier this year. And so I'll just kind of go through those. A couple of things first. There were a couple of different ways that we got input and things that we're addressing through these updates that I'll go over momentarily. First, through the process of a comprehensive plan amendment, you have the transmittal hearing, and at that point, we actually transmitted the proposed master plan to the state for review. It actually goes to Department of Economic Opportunity, which is our state land planning agency, and then a variety of other both state agencies as well as some of the regional entities like the Regional Planning Council and the Water Management District as well. Through that process, we actually got some technical assistance comments back. They were actually quite helpful. We got comments back from the Department of Economic Opportunity, DEP, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Department of Transportation, as well as the Department of State. And those have all been addressed in various ways through this. We also held a number of charrettes. We had 11 different video conferences. I imagine most people on here participated in at least one of those, if not multiple of those, as well as a virtual workshop. The video conferences use WebEx like we're on today, and that virtual workshop was primarily based on SurveyMonkey to give people the ability to go in and provide input even if they weren't able to make it to one of those 11 video conferences. We received basically a packet of information from Keep It Rural. It was their comprehensive greenways plan. We'll address some of that today. We received a letter from ATN, the Alliance of Tallahassee Neighborhoods. It was kind of sent jointly to us in coordination with Keep It Rural. We also had a series of virtual in-person meetings with Keep It Rural that they requested, as well as a virtual meeting with the Tally 100, which they followed up with afterwards with a letter primarily focused on the city's coordinating this with the city's clean energy resolution. We don't have time today to go over every single change, but I want to make sure that we address some of the most notable changes. If you're interested in seeing kind of all of the individual changes, I encourage you to go to the website talgov.com/Welaunee Arch. It's probably the same site where you registered for this, actually. And we have a number of things on that. I'll kind of reiterate it at the end as well. But on that page, we have a summary of all the input that we received through the charrettes. We have a document. Actually, we have two versions of the updated master plan. One's kind of a clean version. It's a little bit easier to read. And then we have a version that is both a strikeout underline of the changes that have occurred that we're proposing since the transmittal hearing, so you can kind of see what's changed from the original master plan to this new updated version. And then we also include a document on that website as well that kind of shows every piece of input that we received, sometimes kind of aggregated together, but we want to make sure that we captured everything. And then if we addressed it in the updated master plan, there were a couple of cases we did not, and we explained in that document why, usually because it's kind of at a level that's more detailed than you would see in the comprehensive plan. But almost, the vast majority of it we did address. And so we go in and explain, where in the master plan you can see kind of the edit that addresses that, as well as kind of a short explanation of how we addressed it. So a lot of information on the website. I encourage you to check that out. So for this, kind of going over some of the more notable changes, one that you'll see as we kind of go through this presentation is we really reorganized the way land is planned in the Welaunee Arch into distinct districts versus having basically like 3 land uses that kind of were applied across the entire arch. we really focus more on having these districts and kind of what development looks like within the districts. With that, we addressed those uses within the districts to make sure that things they transition a little bit more gradually. And so instead of going from a more intense and more dense mixed-use center directly into a lower density residential, we've actually included what you'll see is like a mixed-use neighborhood. We'll kind of get to that a little bit more, but you'll see more of a transition of uses over each district. We've updated the phasing. We actually added a third phase, but we'll address that a little bit more in a moment as well. In addition to just having the land use map, we've actually added 2 other maps. So now we have 3 in total. One's a transportation map and one's a preliminary environmental features map. We've reorganized the way we address the open space into a primary open space system. We address some of the input that we received about housing, particularly affordability of housing and how that interacts with transportation. And we've updated the language on the stormwater facilities master plan as well. So the first map you'll see is the updated land use map. I mentioned we organize things into districts, and so you can see those districts here. They're the 1 through 5, and if you kind of follow along clockwise, starting at the I-10 where the I-10 interchange would be, you basically have your Northeast Gateway district. And then you kind of move into the West Arch district, then the North Arch district, conservation design district, and ultimately kind of number 5 is the residential reserve district. I'll go into a little bit more detail about those momentarily. 4 of these districts have a mixed-use center within them. So you'll see District 1 has the activity center and the employment center. District 2 would have the town center. District 3 and 4 would each have village centers. And those kind of range from most intense, most dense by the I-10 interchange, and then kind of scale back a little bit as you go from the activity center to the town center to the village center. Around 3 of those, so once you get into the town centers and the village centers, we included an area that's a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile around these mixed-use centers. And these are what we're calling the neighborhood zones. They are not quite as intense, not quite as dense as those actual mixed-use centers, but they're higher density, higher intensity than kind of the area outside of them. And we looked at the 1/4 to a 1/2 mile based on a couple things. Planners and our love for jargon have what we call the pedestrian shed or the bicycle shed. Essentially, that is what people are willing to walk to comfortably within 5 minutes, or same kind of goes with bicycling. And so we wanted these areas to be that transition between the more intense and dense mixed-use centers and the areas around them. And we wanted it to be primarily bicycle and pedestrian focused. And so that's why we chose those 1/2 mile, 1/4 mile to 1/2 mile areas. And then in addition to that, we have the residential areas. So you can kind of see the buffer area between the Buckhead neighborhood and the activity center would be a low density residential. If you're familiar with our comprehensive plan now, it's kind of modeled after residential preservation. When you get into districts 2 and 3, it's a small step up in density, still relatively low density actually. Up to 10 units per acre. That's based on our urban residential land use category. Once you kind of move into districts 4 and 5, both of those would be cluster subdivisions. And that's the kind of development pattern you'll see there. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the idea is that the development is kind of clustered together, and then you have a reserve area that is set aside and not developed around each of those. And then with the phasing, districts 1, 2, and 3 would be phase 1, district 4 would be phase 2, and district 3 or district 5 would be phase 3. We've also updated the policies in the master plan to not only have thresholds of development that have to happen in each phase before the next phase occurs, but also making sure that the timing of infrastructure and services are there as well. We specifically called out, having water and sewer availability and capacity that can serve the next phase, as well as police, fire, and schools. So those have to be sufficient capacity before you can move into the next phase. So not only is there thresholds of development, but there's also a coordination of infrastructure and public services before you can move into the next phase. The next map that we added, this is actually a new map from what we had before, is the preliminary environmental features map. Kind of with that, a couple of things I'll go over on that. This would be subject to an actual natural features inventory as plan unit developments or PUDs come in. But we have some pretty good data now, so we can kind of go ahead and start planning out, making sure that those PUDs are coordinated. First, we identified what we anticipate would be either high quality successional forests or native forests. You can see kind of those circled in purple. There's kind of two in what would be District 3, kind of that northwestern area. And then there's the one that's kind of almost adjacent to Miccosukee Road, you can see there. In addition to the high quality successional forest and native forest, we also identified an area that is a core canopy area that's part of kind of forested area that's greater than 500 acres. Our conservation element currently provides protection for the high quality successional forests and the native forests through the preservation areas and conservation areas policies. And that's kind of reflected in the land development code as well. The core forest area is something that's a little bit new. That's based off of the city doing the Urban Forest Master Plan, and then the data that went along with that. And that master plan specifically calls out protecting the core areas that are greater than 500 acres. This actually has an added benefit as well. One of the things that we heard from Fish and Wildlife, as well as through a number of the different charrettes, was the need to make sure we account for wildlife and having wildlife corridors to allow the kind of the movement throughout the arch. And so what we have is basically a continuous network of open space that kind of naturally occurs on the site. But we also added some things to that to make sure that it's protected and can serve as wildlife corridors. Kind of one example of that is we expanded the canopy road protection zone along Miccosukee to add kind of an extra area to that, so that could also function as a wildlife corridor. And then kind of ultimately receiving that kind of connectivity of wildlife corridors into that core forest area that's greater than 500 acres. And so there's kind of a the ability to move throughout the arch, but also kind of a larger area that's protected. We also noted a couple of opportunities to kind of tie into that overall open space network. We note that the perimeter still has the Welaunee Arch Greenway. One thing we did with the maps was actually use the alignment from the Greenways Master Plan. Previously, we just kind of had a dashed line around the perimeter of the arch. And this actually gives kind of a better idea of what that might actually look like versus just kind of a dashed thin line that follows the perimeter. We noted the potential for a regional park kind of next to the schools. This would also tie into the forest areas that we were talking about earlier. We note kind of adjacent to where that potential active park is, that the high quality successional or native forests kind of that are in that area would have a trail system around them that really serves two purposes. One, it has an obvious recreation purpose and would tie well in well with that regional park. But it also serves as a natural fire break to help with the management of those forest areas. And so those trails kind of serve multiple purposes. That's why you see it kind of right between the schools and those forest areas. But the actual final location and the size of it would need to be coordinated through the city, the county, or blueprint, depending on the funding and management of that park. We also noted that the reserve areas that are part of those cluster subdivisions I mentioned earlier would need to be continuous and contiguous. That basically means as PUDs come in, if there's any cluster subdivision adjacent to it, kind of the next proposal and would need to make sure that there's some kind of connectivity between the open space. So what we end up with is basically a system of open space throughout the arch. We also added a transportation map, which will help coordinate transportation kind of among the PUD or PUDs that ultimately implement the Welaunee Arch Master Plan. This addresses a couple of different things that are reflected in policy. First, looking at pedestrian facilities, we note that within the mixed-use areas, sidewalks would need to be on both sides of local streets. In the residential-only areas, you'd have to have a sidewalk on at least one side of those local streets. Once you kind of get into the larger thoroughfares, there would be pedestrian facilities on both sides of the street that could look like sidewalks. It could also be a shared use path or a multi-use trail on one side of the road that would serve as that pedestrian facility. For cyclists, we note the requirement for having a network of bicycle facilities throughout the arch. This could look like a couple different things. It could be on-road bicycle facilities. It could be protected bike lanes. It could be shared use paths or some kind of overall connected system that integrates a couple of different types of facilities. We also note that as these bicycle facilities intersect with the greenway around the perimeter of it, that there'll have to be access from those bicycle facilities to that greenway. For vehicles, we have a system of thoroughfares shown on the map, and that's includes kind of both facilities that are designed more as boulevards, as well as facilities that are designed more as avenues. Boulevards being kind of larger traffic volumes, a little slightly higher speeds, and then avenues being a little bit smaller in scale than boulevards. We have the proposed interstate interchange that would be part of that first district, District 1. And we also have policies in the master plan that talk about the mixed use areas having a gridded system of local roads within those mixed use areas. For transit, we've updated the master plan a couple of different ways. First, we note that as each PUD comes in, that PUD must be coordinated with Star Metro to ensure that there the infrastructure in place to make sure that transit is viable. We note in the master plan that the mixed use areas are intended to have and be designed with transit as a significant component of the overall transportation system within those mixed use areas. And then we also note in the master plan that each PUD has to address how transit facilities will provide connectivity between the transit hub that's in the master plan for the toe and the heel and the mixed use areas that are in the arch. For kind of more forward and future looking transportation options, we also note in the master plan that coordination at each PUD will have to occur both with the planning department and with the underground utilities and public infrastructure department to support both electric vehicles and connected or automated vehicles. This is kind of looking system-wide and making sure that there's the infrastructure in place to support both types of those modes of transportation, both electric vehicles and in the future connected and automated vehicles. Additionally, we have allowed through the master plan for PUDs to include incentives for EV ready and EV capable development that gets kind of more not system-wide, but more smaller scale with the actual development. Of course, the incentives would be much higher for EV ready versus EV capable. But that's actually something that we heard a couple of times through this process. And we want to make sure that the infrastructure needed to support that is well coordinated. Another thing that came up through many of the different threats that we had was addressing housing. So the inclusionary housing ordinance was always a part of the master plan, but in this version of it, we're proposing a number of changes to kind of add on to that as well. We've noted in the master plan the various districts and zones within those districts having more of a range of housing types. as planners, we often talk about the missing middle housing. Kind of included a graphic on this slide to help explain what that means. But basically, we're talking about housing options that are somewhere between single-family detached homes and those mid-rise apartments. So we talk about duplexes and quads or fourplexes, townhomes, and different housing types that some of them we actually don't really see in our community, but they're starting to become a little bit more popular across the country. We've also noted that PUDs can have incentives for low income, very low income housing, also for seniors and for persons with disabilities, kind of making sure that we have more of an inclusive housing options for the entire community in the Arch. And the reason we did that is that allows our housing team to coordinate that and kind of negotiate that at the time of the PUD to make sure that we have different options and different ways of accomplishing more what we consider affordable housing in the traditional sense. And then the Stormwater Facilities Master Plan, we're proposing changes to that. One of the things that we heard through the process of the charrettes was that the language in the master plan for the toe of the heel was actually very effective. And so we've modeled the changes that you'll see in the master plan off of that language. The primary focus being on regional facilities, specifically regional facilities that are designed for safe public access. And we've also tied it to that phasing that I talked about earlier to make sure that we manage stormwater and development in a very coordinated manner. As far as next steps, I encourage everyone to go to the website, talgov.com/Welaunee Arch. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there's a couple of different documents on that page. Includes the current version of the master plan that we're proposing. There's two different ways of looking at that. One is what we call a clean version. It's basically if we accepted all of our proposed changes. That version is a little bit easier to read if you just want to read the master plan. If you're more interested in what has changed from the original proposed master plan to the version that we're proposing now, there is a strike-through underlined version that shows all of those changes. That website also includes a summary of the input that we received through the charrette process. And then there's another document that takes the input we received through the charrette process, as well as the input received through the other channels that I mentioned at the very beginning, the technical assistance comments, the input from Tally 100, the input from Keep It Rural, and the input from the Alliance of Tallahassee Neighborhoods, and goes in and talks about how, how we address that input and where in the master plan, kind of referencing specific policies, that input was addressed. There is a public comment form. So if you read this or you have additional comments and you need some time to kind of think about it and craft that, you can use the comment form. You're also welcome to email it directly to me. Either way kind of works. And then we encourage everyone to check back on the website for schedule updates. At the recent City Commission meeting, the Commission voted to schedule a workshop. And so we'll be working towards doing that. And then the County Commission meets tonight. And so if there's any direction that comes out of that meeting, we'll make sure that that's reflected in the schedule that we post on the website as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions that people may have or take additional input. So I'll hand it over to you, Devin.
All right, Artie. I think the easiest way for us to do this, I've already had some questions about the way the meeting went this time compared to the other time, but if everyone uses the raise the hand button, I can see who's raising their hand and I can unmute you if you have a question. And I know Pam was on here. I'll start with Pam. Pam, I'm going to unmute you now. You're unmuted and should be able to ask a question.
Okay. Wait. Am I supposed to start asking questions already?
Yeah. Did you want to ask a question now?
Well, I actually want to know who else is here. I only see myself listed as the only attendee, and I can't believe that's true.
Well, sure. I'll tell you. We got 26 folks on right now.
Is there any way that we can see the list of names at the very least?
Artie, can we post that where they can see it?
I'm
Okay,
looking
why
to see if there's a
guys-
way to make it visible. I don't know.
I don't remember in the past, I think we used to be able to see it, but I guess I can ask the first question, which I will confess I haven't read every piece of material that you've presented already, Artie, but I've been paying attention to some of it. I really want to know what happened with the open space requirement of the 30 to 40% set aside. Now it appears to be that you get credits for land that's not developable anyways. I'm not quite sure how to read your credit system. But I am concerned that we had an opportunity here to have a substantial portion of this parcel set aside as open space from which there were not transfer development rights. So there wasn't any reason for credits, although I'm willing to consider how, you know, if you end up with too much of your PUD and land that's wetlands, but you shouldn't be buying that land then. Because what it looks like now is all that's open space is wetlands and floodplains with a little bits and patches of the other forests. Put it this way, it's only the land under the conservation element, which I think is the minimum that ought to be in it. The point of Keep It Rural's presentation of a park system was to have significantly greater protection of the canopy roads, not 75 feet, of which 12 to 15 feet of that would be some sort of nearly paved greenway, quote, greenway, actually a paved multi-use path of some sort, or it's not paved, but if it's going to look like the roadway in the Miccosukee Greenway, now you can drive a car down it. There is no big habitat park system except for wetlands and floodplains, and a few patches of other upland forest. But I'd really like to know why it is that this designation, of which many large developments throughout Florida up front designated a certain proportion of the land as so I don't know what the credit system is for that. As a set aside that's not developable too. It doesn't require it being only minimized to the environmental conservation features. There's a lot more land to protect than just what we think, a lot more habitat to protect than just what we think we can't develop on. So why did you remove that, Artie?
So for the cluster subdivision, there's the requirement for 60% versus the 40% that you can develop on. You do get credit for kind of that minimum area, but overall you'd have to still meet that 60% land that's set aside.
But that was developable land. What happened to the large 30 to 40% of open space that was designated as undevelopable land, for which you don't get a transfer of development rights, though I can understand some need to negotiate part of that. And cluster subdivisions are patches of land here and there. They're not, unless you somehow preordain that every cluster subdivision will share contiguous boundaries so that there's a large habitat park. I mean, that I understand that might be something that we need direction from the commissioners for, but many large Florida developments set aside huge amounts of land on the upfront. That's not just land you can't build on because it's wetland and floodplains. And that policy has clearly been eliminated here. And I would like to know why.
I will connect with you, if that's okay, Pam, directly to make sure that we're on the same page.
Because well, remember I was talking before, we talked about the cluster stuff is developable land that they were clearly choosing by clustering their property. They're clearly choosing not to develop on. Therefore, you got, if you had 6 units per acre, you have a 100-acre cluster subdivision. You get 60 units, and you can put them all on 30%. Or I was being more liberal when I was talking about that 40 or 50, or up to 70% of the land, and then set aside the other. That was a completely different negotiation than the upfront land use district designation of open space, which, from what I can tell from your map, is essentially the original 900 acres of wetlands and floodplains, and maybe another couple hundred acres. I don't really know. You didn't add it all up. It would be nice to know, of identified important natural features, which is nice to have. A very skinny strip along the canopy roads, of which, as I said, there's going to be a 10, 15 foot multi-use road. I don't know what to call it. It's not a trail. It's not a greenway because it's going to be semi-paved. So that's going to eat up a lot of that habitat, which is what the canopy trees need to survive and persist. But then there was another 500 to 1,000 acres that was just open space that would connect these things. I do appreciate the fact that you have made a pretty good connection between the wetlands and stuff. I get that. That's nice. But there's no big habitat park unless you're a duck. And that was, I mean, I know it might have been a reach, but that was one of the major requests of the Keep It Rural, that like Eleanor Phipps, that there be a large habitat park in here. And I also note that you've now made a connection to Roberts Road, which I thought that that was something we were going to try to prevent, because this means suburbia is leaking directly into rural areas. And that was part of the reason to have that habitat park there, was to, since the USA boundary doesn't work as a good barrier, to have something that's undeveloped to work as a barrier.
So we can connect later to make sure I'm fully understanding everything, and we can kind of look at policy by policy. I want to make sure we have other people have the time to talk today.
Okay.
I will note that kind of for everyone's edification, that there is policy language in there that says that this cluster subdivisions will have to be coordinated so that the reserve area is connected. You made a note of kind of making sure that that's preordained, or I'm not sure exactly what term you use, but we did include that in there because that's a specific requirement that that open space that's set aside through the reserve area is connected. As far as the,
thank you very much.
Yeah, as far as the larger open space park, wildlife, Eleanor Phipps kind of thing, instead of it being kind of in the northern part of the property along Roberts, and where Roberts and Crump kind of make that bend, we actually put it on the far eastern side of the property, because that's where that large canopy area, basically unfragmented canopy, exists. And so it would be better to protect that as it's already.
Can you show me where
area.
that is on the map? Then I misunderstood it. I don't see it on the.
Let me.
I see these are all, because the green spaces that are there all map to the floodplains and the green spaces that are already there. There's a bit of an extension I see up in the very northeast at the trailhead, but that's not a huge number of acres. I mean, if you mapped your green space over in map number 3 and preliminary environmental features, how much of that is not the already existing floodplains and wetlands? The brown and the dark green, that's the appropriate color coding system to understand?
Right. So this area, I think people can see my cursor. I'm not 100% sure, but it's the area kind of on the far east that connects both to the proposed wildlife corridors and to the larger Miccosukee Canopy Road. Is that intended to be that kind of that open space / forested area that would be set aside? As far as the
how much land is that outside of the wetlands?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'd have to calculate it, and I can coordinate with you on that a little bit later.
Like maybe 100 acres, maybe 150.
In addition to kind of what exists in the canopy protection zone, which is kind of the area on both sides, we've added on to that. That doesn't necessarily have to have a greenway in it. I think we said that it's allowed as long as it can still operate as a wildlife corridor, but you have the actual greenway along the southern boundary
what about
here.
The one in Centerville? Yeah, I'm sorry, this is true, although it's still very narrow. It's only 75 feet more. I assume that's 75 feet outside of an existing 100-foot buffer, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, what about the Centerville side then? The Miccosukee Greenway has its trail system already for the canopy area. Yes. What about Centerville?
So Centerville would have the canopy protection zone as well as the Welaunee Greenway, which is kind of based on the blueprint, between 75 and 150 feet in width.
Okay, well, as our suggestion was substantially larger on both sides to really create habitat, not only habitat protection, but for corridors and that sort of thing. And I agree on the Miccosukee side. On the inside the Welaunee, there isn't any reason to put a trail system per se, because there is one on the other side that's in the existing Miccosukee Greenway. But the reason to do it wider on any of these sides is to create real habitat. You know, another 100 feet. I don't know. I mean, I live in rural areas. Another 100 feet, especially when everything around it is suburban, is not much of a habitat corridor, and it's not much of a habitat for the growing of a forest that gives you the canopy trees. Because not every canopy tree is sitting there with its roots right on the edge of the road. I mean, we already know if you look at degradation of the canopy, where things have been cut back to the minimum of the current existing rules, which are 100 feet from the center line, of which turns out to be maybe about 50 feet once you get across the ditches that these roads have in them. That's not much forest there. That was one of the reasons for having it substantially larger, particularly on the Centerville side, where you're going to put a good sized multi-use trail. And so I have a question about why the Centerville side isn't substantially larger for its purposes, which we could talk about later. And to understand, I mean, and then the other thing is why the connection to Roberts Road, which truly makes that boundary of urban service area pretty useless. I mean, it already has been expunged with this development anyways. And so now it exists there, but there's nothing to actually make it work, especially if you have a suburban development. I know it's clustered development, it's supposed to look rural, but that's not what it is. It's a zone suburban development with access to the rural lands right there. And that was the point of having a Greenway Park up there, because that was only 300 acres of upland, and the rest of it was already undeveloped, a bowl wetland. Okay. You and I will take this offline, but if there's other people from Keep It Rural, other people who care about having a real park system, I do want to know where the 1,900 potential acres of open space disappeared to. And some of it you have accounted for, so I'd like to see that account. Thank you, Artie.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Pam. Appreciate it. Artie, I have about 3 other folks in queue right now. I'm going back on mute with Pam. Just so everybody knows, some folks were asking how to raise their hand. If you go up into the chat function, there should be a little hand in the top of the chat function at the top right, or you also can open the participants list and there'll be a hand next to your name. And if you click on that, it will raise the hand. And if you can't find that, feel free to just send me a message in chat and I'll add you to the queue. Right now I have queued up, I have Jeff Blair, Ray Hernandez, and Robert Apgar. So give me just a second to get to Jeff. I'm gonna unmute Jeff. All right, Jeff, you're unmuted.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, first, I actually did spend this morning more than 4 hours reviewing the proposed edits and making comments and highlighting sections of it. Pam hit a lot of what I want to say, so I won't go into great detail and repeat. So, Artie, I'd like you to get with me on that too. Obviously, first, appreciate the responsiveness to comments generally and making the changes. I do think that this is much better than the previous version. The area that I would have still concerns with would be the open space and greenway requirement provisions, the stormwater provisions, and the phasing provisions. And I'll touch on each of those in terms of what the concerns are. The buffer on Miccosukee of 75 feet, we had proposed 400 feet. We had proposed 90 acres buffer against not what's being proposed in this in 13.2.4, which I think is not adequate. I think the park system up in the sort of, I guess you'd almost call it the northeast or the southeast corner up there where the trailhead off of Crump Road is. That land really shouldn't be built on. It really does provide a buffer. And a lot of it is sort of habitat that would be best protected. And, again, everything that we propose is in the 30 to 40% open space requirement that we understood that we were working with, which seems to have been quite a bit diminished. And that's a concern for the open space piece of this. And the connection to Roberts Road, it was a surprise as well. Or to Crump Road, as it may be, right there at kind of where I used to live, right across the street from there, basically. Across the street from the trailhead, a little bit further down on a piece of property, but still, close enough. That would really alter the rural character that this is now butting up against. So that's problematic. I mentioned the buffers and the widths and the fact that there really needs to be a more open space that's not traded for development rights, but is there because that's a requirement and should be there to protect all the features that we've described in detail in the past. The stormwater thing, in general, my concerns with all of this is there's a little too much permissive language. There's may, possible, potential locations. I'd like to see potential locations, especially as it references environmental features, to locations as specified on the preliminary environmental features. So it's not permissive, it's yes, this area, we know there's a red oak forest here and it needs to be saved, so it shall be protected. So there's a lot of stuff like that I marked through here where potential locations can be specified. And where permissive language should be replaced with shall instead of may in some instances, not in all, but in many. Excuse me. And then the stormwater piece, I don't see how that stormwater master plan component, I believe it's 13.2.32, adequately defines how it would be a requirement across all the PUDs and not just a requirement for specific each individual PUDs. I'm concerned with potential continuity loss if something isn't tightened up there. I think the concept is good generally, but it needs to be tightened up to reflect that it's not just being done per PUD, but each PUD would comply with an overarching and larger plan as a part of it. And it doesn't say that, and it should. The phasing piece, I believe, which is 13.2.5, I think needs a little more work as well. I'd like to have, just a little more detail on how those phases will be done, what they mean, and in what instances will the putting together of the park system and the stormwater system have to be done in a way that has continuity and connection per the overall plan. So again, there's lacking detail in those pieces of it. The buffers, the greenway, the stormwater, the phasing. I appreciate the 13.2.23 bicycle components and the pedestrian components. I think some of that needs to be tightened up. May and where feasible should be shall be done. And in some cases, it makes sense, but in others, and I identified them specifically, I think it should be a requirement. The idea of that open spaces can be either in public or private ownership is mentioned in numerous locations, but I believe that those other locations should reflect back to so the requirement that it's clear that that public access shall be provided, irrespective of the ownership. It is in only one location where that is clear, and I think that's I forget where it is, 13.2 point, maybe somewhere further down the road, 36 or something, but it's not in numerous locations previous to that, and I highlighted those in my notes as well. Just to clarify that, irrespective of whether it's public or private land, it's accessible to the public. Globally, that needs to be applied, not just in one section of about 5. Those are my primary comments. The open space we think needs to be expanded, the buffers expanded, the Buckhead buffer expanded, the greenways expanded, clarification on continuity and requirements for stormwater across PUDs, and then the phasing needs a little more of that as well. It's all done as planned without being able to be negotiated away. So those are my primary comments.
Okay, yeah, and Jeff, if you could send those to me, then we can schedule a time to follow up. But I'll give me a chance to kind of read through them and see if things are actually already addressed or if potential updates need to be made.
Okay, I'll send them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. I'm going to be putting Jeff back on mute now. All right, and then next up I have Ray Hernandez. Let me get to Ray's name real quickly. Ray, you're unmuted. Feel free to go ahead and speak.
It looks like he's still muted, Devin.
He been. Ray, are you there?
Yep.
All right, Ray, go ahead. You can speak now.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ray Hernandez. I'm Vice President of the Home Association Arbor Branch. I concur with Pam and Jeff and their concerns and observations. Our main concern is with the storm drainage. There's a pathway, a storm drainage that cuts underneath Miccosukee, and it goes straight down the middle of Arbor Branch. Last year, with the amount of precipitation we had last year, those homes that backed up into that drainage were flooded. The backyards the water got all the way up to the edge of those homes. So our question is, is there any consideration for development for that storm drainage that leads all the way up to I-10 that will be coming in from, I think, the area 1 of the multi-use area, which is the first one to be developed. So our main concern is that storm drainage that cuts through Arbor Branch, leading all the way out to I-10 and that basin, water basin out there.
I don't have an answer at the moment. I'd have to look at a map and kind of understand the area you're talking about, but I'd be happy to get with our growth management department and kind of look at that question specifically and make sure that we're not exacerbating a problem and potentially kind of helping it.
Yeah, because the problem is that there's been growth there in that drainage that cuts through our neighborhood, and that's gonna prevent the water from free flowing out all the way out to that basin by I-10, and that's our main concern with the whole development.
Okay, that's good to know, and I'll look into that. I'm not familiar with that specific area. But I'll look at it with our growth management team to make sure that we're looking at that appropriately.
And how can I guess I can email a map with drawings on it just to show, or what our concern is, or I don't know what's the best way for me to communicate that to you.
Actually, if you could mark up a map or kind of send me a description, that'd probably be the best way. That way I can make sure that we're looking at the right area.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do a screenshot of Google Maps and then draw on that.
That'd be excellent.
Okay, I'll do that.
Great, thank you.
Ray, do you have Artie's email address to be able to get that to him?
Is it on the website or anywhere I could find it, or you could put it in the chat room and I could take it from there, or?
Yeah, we can throw it in the chat. We can throw it in the chat for everyone. In fact, I think I can do that now. Yeah.
That way you're not having to look for it later, Ray.
Okay.
All right, Ray, anything else?
No, that's it, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Artie, I got 2 more now. I got Robert Apgar, and then I have Mike Rickle. Gonna go to Robert. Let me unmute him. Robert, you are unmuted. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We can.
Artie, this is Bob Apgar, and I represent Buckhead, as you know.
Yeah.
And of course, we're concerned with the mixed use area and what that's going to look like because it's due east of Buckhead. Looking at the language in the revised plan about the transportation network, and particularly policy 13.2.20, we like the language about the interchange connecting with a gridded street network and city blocks. Like previous speakers, we would like to see those should turn to shalls rather than saying the gridded street system should serve to divert traffic into a network. We'd like to see it say it shall serve to do that. that speaks directly to the design. And I wonder if you have considered using criteria out of the Florida DOT context classification guide that I think relates directly to what you're trying to do here, and gives you some criteria that could help ensure that those city blocks wind up looking like downtown Tallahassee. Because of course our fear is that if we get past the plan amendment stage to the PUD stage, Welaunee Boulevard could wind up looking more like Thomasville Road north of I-10, or Mayhem Drive, or Appalachian Parkway, as a series of discrete little PUDs without connections and without that network that you describe here. So we'd just like to see stronger criteria to make sure that happens. But we really like what you've got here so far.
Thanks. And yeah, I can take a look at it and kind of evaluate the shoulds and the shalls. There may be instances that kind of you and the previous speakers as well brought up that where we might want to consider one or the other, or kind of bolstering up the shoulds to being shalls as well. And you know, the question about the DOT context classification, without applying specific context classifications, I've tried to actually leverage some of the kind of the intent out of the context classification and the Florida Design Manual as well. Specifically when we're talking about, when I mentioned the boulevards versus the avenues, making sure that we're looking at design speeds and things like that appropriately. And so I think that's actually a good point. Related but unrelated, ultimately, you know, when we look at updating the land use element, which I was actually hoping to have done kind of prior to this, but it's kind of taking a different schedule. One of the things I'd like to do is apply, you know, context more broadly, so we can address transportation and land use together, you know, across the community. So yeah, I appreciate your kind of reference to both of the context classification and applying that.
Thanks. And please, you know, we think the C4 and C5 classifications in that DOT manual would be appropriate here. And in that manual, it gives us some criteria for those that it might be very well to either reference or build right into the plan.
That's a good point.
I mean, this is our chance to design a roadway network. Developers don't volunteer to build roadway networks. They like, you know, little self-contained projects, and they don't want the expense of building a whole roadway network. So if we're going to do this and make it happen, this is the time to do it.
It's a good point.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Robert. All right, already up next, I got Mike Ricklick. Let me get to Mike's name. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, you are unmuted and ready to go.
Okay, thanks, Devin. I appreciate that. And thank you, Artie, for all the work you've been doing. I hope you've been getting some sleep in between all this.
Not much, but I appreciate that.
I can imagine. It's quite a writing project, I'm sure. But one thing I wanted to ask about that, and I think this is one of the things with Keep It Rural, you know, regarding the parks, because we've mentioned many times that we think the best thing for the city to do, and for the staff, of course, because you're working for the city, is to cordon this park off and have it specified. And this language keeps coming up. I've noticed in several spots where, for instance, on page 6, under D, under open space greenway for the particular district that it's talking about, at that juncture, it says the location of protected areas will be determined through a natural features inventory approved by the city prior to approval of a PUD concept plan that includes this district. Now, what I'm wondering is, are they only going to do this every time a PUD comes up, or is it going to be a contiguous thing that is done in this, is this survey, this natural features inventory, is it going to be done holistically, conceptually, specifically? you know, that's what we'd like to see, is it for this whole thing to be planned ahead of time so that that land is being developed to be a park system, to be a trail system, to be a natural habitat, well ahead of anything being done. And we just like to see that put in more stronger language, and to have a plan to begin with so that things don't get developed that shouldn't be, you know, things don't get crossed. Everything's pretty clear to the developer what can and can't be developed in that particular district. Does that make sense? You understand what I'm saying?
It does. The natural features inventory is quite involved, actually. You have certified biologists kind of going out to the site and evaluating the entire site and kind of looking at everything in great detail. And so that happens at the PUD level. But what we've tried to do at this stage is kind of make it clear, you know, what has to be set aside, and then kind of above and beyond that, you know, at that PUD level, once the natural features inventory has been done, kind of what part of that would have to be set aside in addition to that kind of that minimum.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that sounds like we're doing it still what we've been talking about a lot, that our trepidation with this. And I think not just keep it rural, but I think we speak for the public who doesn't, you know, that wants a place that's going to be a beautiful place for the public to enjoy and make it, like I've said many times to y'all, an attraction and not a distraction. And, you know, the things that have happened so far haven't been very positive with regard to canopy. You've heard me rail about that a lot, but a lot of people have in this community. And I think that's what people are concerned about and what we're trying to help you all avoid. And I think by having it be a holistic plan so that the whole thing is the greenway, the trails, the parks, that's the thing that's going to be the selling point for the community. The thing that's not going to be is more traffic, more roads, more flooding, more things that become, you know, problematic for everybody involved, you know, including the city and the county and y'all, you know. Another thing I wanted to mention is where you talk about street trees, which is another thing that didn't really happen so far in the canopy. There's really no place to plant trees on the sidewalks that they've built. There's too little space. I've done some research, and for a real shade tree of 30 to 50 feet, you need a 5 to 6 foot space of land between the sidewalk and the street in order for it to actually be enough room. So I think being specific with how, once again, how to make that happen so that they just don't develop up to right up to the street and put the sidewalk right next to it, where the only place you could put a shade tree would be in somebody's yard. I think it would behoove the city to have that space, you know, specified and, you know, make that a part that they have to do. So I think that language like that would help a great deal to make this a lot more attractive.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. And you know, we can kind of look at language, and if you have some recommendations on it, you're definitely welcome to kind of send them my way. But you know, we are trying to learn from previous development, and you know, that's why the landscaping policy was added in to make sure that there is some street trees, because that's, you know, it's actually something that many of us are passionate about. You know, I know that I am, and Mindy's on as well, our urban forester, and she has a deep love for trees. So, but yeah, if there's improvements you see, definitely feel free to send it my way.
Okay, well, you know we will. You know I will.
I appreciate it too.
All right, thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks, Devin.
All right, Artie, we have Shirley Kearns is the last person I have in queue right now, and I'm going to go to her. Shirley, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All right, you are good to go.
Great. I'm Shirley Kearns, president of Buckhead Homeowners Association. Artie, I want to echo our thanks for your work. I don't know how you do this. We appreciate it. No rest for the weary, for sure. real quickly, because I know we're kind of running a little long now. I did want to just quickly echo and endorse what the Keep It Rural folks have indicated about having there be a thoughtful, comprehensive park and greenway system. I think it's a super opportunity for us to do this for the community. And if we don't do this right now, we've really missed a big opportunity. I won't spend a ton of time on that, but wanted you to know that we fully support that. Bob Apgar, mentioned the roadway network. We have been concerned about the absence of planning for a roadway network, especially within that mixed use area. So if that's where that policy 13.2.20 is headed, I know Bob's going to spend more time on that issue, but it's important to think about that as well. The one last thing I'll ask about, more than make a statement, is it's not clear to me, and maybe it's too early in the process, where connectivity to the greenway occurs or is decided. It may be not appropriate in the comp plan. I looked and didn't see that it specified certain things. So I guess I'll just ask you about that, and then depending on what you say, I may have a couple more things to say about that.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the connectivity, it's more focused on, within each of those districts, making sure that there's a connectivity between the residential portion and then the adjacent greenway. And then as the bicycle and pedestrian facilities are planned and designed, that they would also have connectivity to the greenway. And then overall, looking at having that pedestrian overpass that provides that connectivity to the greenway over I-10, as well as where it kind of connects to the existing Miccosukee Greenway.
Okay. Well, obviously, we're in favor of connectivity to the greenway because we want to use it and we understand it's needed. What I was concerned about, and what we've been concerned about and talking about for 2 or 3 years, is connecting outside of the arch, such as connectivity through Buckhead to that aspect of the greenway. We would have absolutely no interest in that. We don't need the added traffic coming through Buckhead in order to access the greenway anywhere along that perimeter. So we've been talking about this, and people tell us that comes later, that comes later, that comes later. So we just didn't know. We seem to be getting closer, and I just wanted to mention that. And if you need to direct us to a different area or at a different point in the process, I would ask you to do that for us, okay?
Of course, and I can kind of follow up with Blueprint because the Welaunee Boulevard and the Greenway are kind of all together as part of that Northeast Gateway project.
Okay, well, we've told them. We've told them as well. So,
yeah, but I haven't included any language about connecting to Buckhead.
I didn't see that.
On our previous conversations.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see that in your materials, so I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something. Thank you, Artie. That's all I have.
I know there's also a call-in user, Devin. They may not have the ability to raise their hand, so we may want to check and see if they have any comments
all right,
or questions.
Give me 1 second. Let me go back to mute. I actually had a couple questions over here that came in that I want to run through real quickly too, if we can.
Okay.
Let's see if I can unmute the call-in. I just unmuted our call-in user. Is there anyone that's on the phone that wanted to ask a question? All right, hearing none. All right, Artie, I had a couple questions from Pam that came in through the chats. She wanted to know if the attendees would be willing to share their email addresses with each other. So that's just something that I'll put out there, and I don't know how we handle that one. And then she had a question about stormwater. If there were no other speakers, I don't have anyone else queued up. Do you have time to take that stormwater question?
Sure.
All right, let me get back to Pam.
Am I muted? Oh, there I am. Okay.
Pam, are you there?
Hey,
Yep.
Pam.
Okay, so the stormwater, and I'm sorry, I usually do my homework and I just haven't already.
Well, in all honesty, like part of the reason for this presentation was to kind of walk people through the big changes. So when they do go back and look at it, they have a sense of what they're looking at. So
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's why I joined early. I just thought, well, what the heck, I might as well let Artie walk me through this. So I know in one of our conversations, in one of these many meetings, some of the staff members mentioned about how much work was done by the city on stormwater in the toe and the heel. And I hear that you said that you modeled some of this language after what was that, which I like that continuity. If what happened in the toe and heel worked. Now, and then of course the heel has no development, so we don't know. Now, I know there's a distinction between violating the regulations as you're building, which is different, which we know did happen in the canopy community, versus whether or not the planning and the integration worked. So I'd like to know, I mean, you can tell me whether or not you've had these conversations, but I mean, I know that John Buss was intimately involved in that stuff at Dove Pond, but I am really ignorant of all that went down. I think that might be, especially to, when you guys get your opportunity to describe this to the commissioners, instead of saying that citizens raised a bunch of concerns about stormwater, although I think the Ava Branch guys have something cooking there that you need to check out, but to point out what it is that the city did in the toe in particular. Well, I don't know what they did between the toe and the heel before there was even a discussion of a PUD. I know land changed hands, so maybe because the toe was only two entities, one being the city, this ends up making the whole thing look more like Southwood, which is a different entity than what we're dealing with here. Because our biggest problem here is the PUD by PUD development process that's going on instead of being able to do everything on the upfront with one developer. So, and that's what we're all, I think that's the needle we're trying to thread here. So I think it would behoove you, and I would like to have a real synopsis of what was done on the public end with whoever was in charge of the lands at the time, and maybe that was the public with itself, because it's COT owns some of that. What they really had to do beforehand, and how often they had to adjust that, and then the conceptual, I don't want to go into who did what right or wrong, but the conceptual, well, the issues that they then raised when the PUDs actually came forward and wanted to start to move dirt. I think that process is very important for us to understand what type of master planning for stormwater needs to take place here. Because I fully understand no PUD that's going to come in and build all their little ponds, that stuff doesn't have to be known beforehand. But the placement of the regional ponds, you know, there was Dove Pond already there, so maybe that was just a topographical convenience that there was but you know, I think in that it would really behoove you, especially, and to maybe allow to be presented by the professional stormwater staff of the city to the commissioners, an understanding of how that process took place. And I think the same thing happens, though I don't quite know whether we have a convenient example of the distinction between doing NFIs to decide where a park goes versus doing the more general levels that we've already done and have a pretty good idea. I don't know of, you think of an example where that's been, I don't know what Southwood did. You know, and I don't know that Southwood has big habitat parks. Anyways, what I'm trying to, you know, because your commissioners, our point here is the next step needs not to be run by you guys. I know what you do. I know the work you do. I know how intensely detailed and complete it can be. But the commissioners need to weigh in and say, you know, yes, we want this big general idea. No, we don't want that one. And I think that distinction between what happens with these big general ideas, there's a bunch of us here pushing for parks, for the stormwater. And then thank you, Bob Apgar. I'm really ignorant about transportation, which I know you are not, Artie. So the two of you can talk that language, but about the importance that cross PUDs, especially in one of the discussions when you talked about there might be a potential for many small PUDs, that we don't end up with all this access like along Capitol Circle or Thomasville, that we really end up with a much more downtown Tallahassee look and how that takes place. Your commissioners don't get it. Excuse me if there's any commissioner listening, you don't really get it. I mean, that's what you have professional staff for, but I think those are the level of decisions they need to be making for you. And so you need to give them examples of when it has or has not been done well. And the stormwater is the most obvious one, right? You got this example, you modeled it after the toe and the heel. There was lots of work done. It'd be really nice to know what the staff who did that work think about that process and how that relates to the arch. Lessons learned. Okay.
To that, I will say that I am working very closely with both underground utilities and public infrastructure and the growth management department on that language. Because honestly, out of everything, I would say stormwater is probably one of the areas I'm weakest in. And so I am relying on.
But it's less language than the thought process that they went through, because I think a lot of this is to scale. It's always been about what goes in the comp plan, what goes in the master plan, what goes in regulations. And now we've decided the master plan is the comp plan. But we're still arguing with each other about the scale at which decisions in the shells are shells and the maze are maze. And I think that we're not going to really come to a good set of criteria for deciding that for each component of every development, that they're all in the master plan. I don't think we're missing a component, that's for sure. Until we see an example of that having been done someplace. So yeah, you can show it to us all you want in language already, but I need to hear, and I think your commissioners, because I think they're like me, they need to hear the guys who did the work talk in general principles about how they decided how much they needed to do what now, how much they needed to lay on the PUD guys, and how much it took for the public to take responsibility for it or not. Not what language. Once you get down to language, it becomes, it's very hard for the rest of us out here in the fields to really understand what that's going to look like. And I can't believe that my commissioners are much better at it than me. I don't know if that's always fair, but anyway, so see if you can get some of that staff to do a presentation to your commissioners. I mean, hopefully we will get some more time to really work on this. The city seems to want to go that way. That might be really something to say to them. You know, we've got 4 or 5 major topics. How about if we bring the staff who've worked on these on other projects and help you determine the distinctions between the high level and the lower level and what really works in language that can make a PUD, a series of PUDs, produce the vision we had at the beginning and not just maybe hopefully hit the mark. Okay, so that's not in language already. Let's bring the people who talk about it to them. And you know, I always like a classroom, so please educate me more, please. I'm sort of taking advantage of staff's expertise to hear that. Thank you, Artie.
Of course, thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Artie, we have no more folks in the queue right now. You are at 146. I'll hand it back over to you if you want to close it out.
Sure, and I'll reclaim the host role while I'm at it. I think I can do that.
Hey, one other thing that Pam asked is she just said, could you collect the names of the people who are willing to share? And then she put her information in the question and answer as well.
Okay, I'll see how I can do that in WebEx the best way possible. But I think also if Pam shared her email address, then anyone who wants to coordinate can also kind of reach out to her afterwards. That might be the easiest way. You know, I feel like I've become a WebEx expert, but there's still a lot of things I don't quite know how to do in it. But yeah, so if anyone wants to reach out to Pam, I think she's sharing her contact information in the chat, and I know I see Jeff Blair did as well. So feel free to kind of coordinate, kind of independent of this. Yeah, so just kind of in closing, I appreciate everyone coming out. Hopefully the overview was helpful, especially as you kind of get into the different documents that I noted. In case anyone came out late, the documents are on the website, www.talgov.com/Welaunee Arch. And so if you have any problems accessing those files, feel free to let me know. And with that, if you have any comments or suggestions, we have the comment form on the website, and you can always reach out to me. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.